First tonight, 8 days after Ukrainian troops crossed the border into Russia, Moscow and Kyiv have given contradictory accounts of the situation in Kursk, the Russian border region into which Ukraine poured its troops last week. The Defense Ministry in Moscow said that its forces have repelled attempts by Ukrainian mobile units to push deeper into Russian territory. But Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said Kyiv's troops had advanced by up to 2 kilometers and captured more than 100 Russian servicemen since this morning. He said the advance made peace more likely. Correspondents say it's quite a complicated and confused picture. Meanwhile, the governor of the Russian border region of Belgorod has declared a state of emergency.
Approximately at 11 a.m. there was a rocket strike aimed at this educational facility. 2 people died on the playground. Other people who were in the house survived, thank God. The wall is thick, about 75 centimeters, so it saved those 3 women who were working there. But not the 2 brothers. One, Dima, was 6 years old. His brother Bogdan was 22 or 23. Please check, if you lack anything, we can give you it. I understand that while certain aid packages from our partners are on the way, it's not easy. But maybe there are ways for us to fortify our troops in these directions. Pay your attention to this. Groups of the defense forces continue conducting assault operations on the territory of the Kursk region. From the beginning of the day, the troops advanced for 1 to 2 kilometers in certain directions. We finished the search and elimination of the enemies on the territory of Sudza. From the beginning of today, we captured more than 100 of enemy's military servicemen.
Well, for more on this, let's cross live to London and speak with Arise European Affairs analyst, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz. Dr. Laskiewicz, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And I'm sure you know there are conflicting reports from Kyiv and Moscow about how far these Ukrainian troops have gone into Russian territory, but it does seem as if both sides are digging in, which would suggest some kind of long-term strategy from Kyiv. So nothing like the shoot and scoot that Ukraine has mounted before.
Yes, they appear to be now settling in, as you say. There is now a problem for Ukraine. If it's shoot and scoot, they could have withdrawn. The more they insist on holding on to this territory, the higher the stakes go, in the sense that were they to lose it, it would be now a profound defeat, whereas with a shoot and scoot, no such possibility exists. Here, we have to point out that the Russian tactics are, of course, historically, like Zhukov, are to try and hold the enemy and then attack him on his flanks. That's what happened at Stalingrad. And it would appear the Russians are preparing something, because if they're not halting the Ukrainian advance as much as they could, what are these other troops doing? It would follow their thinking in terms of a counterattack, which is why presumably also the neighboring provinces have been cleared of people, because it is assumed that would be the area of attack. As for Ukraine itself, it's not clear precisely what their long-term objective is, in the sense that if they want to hold on to this land, then it follows logically that they're going to settle in, as you said, but to what end?
Yes, so just based on what you're saying there, I mean, the dilemma now, not so much for President Putin, who clearly wants the Ukrainians out, but for President Zelensky as to whether his troops stay put or get out. And I imagine that there are risks and rewards, whatever he chooses to do.
Yes, quite right. When I say to what end, it must be realized that the actual saying of a kilometer or 2 of territory, even 1,000 square kilometers held, actually is minimal compared to Russia. And therefore, this is, in Russian terms, a small amount of territory lost. In their time, the Russians have lost to Poland or to Sweden or to Germany or to France vast swathes of territory and still come back fighting and gone on to win the war. So in this sense, the Ukrainian successes, as I said yesterday, are of course good for morale, but the long-term strategy is unclear, because if they can't hold on to this territory, well, that will be a defeat. And if they, for example, withdraw, that will be a defeat. So it's not clear what his strategy is. He appears to want Ukraine to advance further, but this then lengthens the supply line and makes it all the harder to hold on to the territory he conquers. So that's why I said, what end is unclear. He has given no indication of his long-term plan.
Well, I mean, listening to him speaking earlier, he had said that the advance made peace more likely. Those were his words. But putting it in perspective, Dr. Laskiewicz, as you have done in our earlier conversations, I mean, the area the Ukrainians have taken is minuscule, absolutely minute, compared to the areas of Ukraine that Russia still occupies.
Quite right. Never mind comparing it with the incursion territory with the whole of Russia, even compared with the amount Russians hold of Ukraine, it is, of course, far less. And the point that I'm making peace more likely, I have no idea where he gets this strange idea from. There is no obvious reason for Russia to agree to any peace terms. They're not being forced. An incursion like this, as I say, it is, of course, an embarrassment initially, but the Russians have been through that before. And if the Russians succeed in actually wiping out this incursion, as they historically have done against their enemies in the past, it will be a profound defeat, quite unnecessary, because Ukraine was holding its own defensively, and having risked a lot of its troops offensively, if they are lost, will be a double blow for it. I think, as you say, it is up to President Zelensky to think carefully, but it'd be nice to see the West also playing a role and asking him quite what is his strategy, including any exit strategy. All of these terms are missing. I think in that sense, his idea that it will help peace is wrong, and will, I imagine, in the next few months be shown to be demonstrably wrong.
Nevertheless, this Ukrainian incursion into Russia is an embarrassment for Mr. Putin and a bloody nose for his military. Do you think heads will roll as questions are asked about who was supposed to be in charge in Russia?
Oh, I think there will be a change in personnel, to put it euphemistically. Although Russia, as President Putin once said, is no longer as it was, and I don't suppose they'll be shot as they were under Stalin's rule. However, I imagine there'll be changes of personnel. But then, in a sense, that what happens during a war, during, for example, the First World War, the French army, many officers were dismissed by the French government at the very start because they just weren't up to it. And after an incursion like this, yes, there will be some changes of personnel, but it hasn't actually changed anything in the long run in that sense. Far more dangerous is the fact the West seems to think that Russia's on the run. And one keeps reading reports about how they should be sending more equipment, they shouldn't have been sending it so slowly, as if the danger of a nuclear war is non-existent. But it is. And unfortunately, especially now with America talking about nuking up, in terms of the fact that it may have to deal with several nuclear threats immediately, I think that the problem here is that we may, as I say, as a result of this quite small Ukrainian success, actually escalate ourselves one step further to a nuclear war, which is, of course, the very thing to avoid.
And what are you hearing, Dr. Laskiewicz, about Belarus, which is Russia's ally? Russia has some nuclear weapons stationed there. What role is it playing in this war in Ukraine?
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? Belarus has not played a huge military presence, but it is an ally. Russia doesn't have that many allies, and so Belarus's actions, however small they are, and they are minuscule, sending some advisors or simply even speaking with Russia, it does have a role to play. I don't think it's going to have any effect militarily. I don't think it's very important in that respect. Belarus would only be important if Russia succeeded in winning the Ukrainian war to some degree, because it borders directly onto, because Belarus, that is, borders directly onto Poland. Now, depending what his long-term vision is Belarus is an essential ally for him if he's going to try and do something about the Baltic states later on, because Putin has ambitions, it's quite clear, and they're not going to stop at Ukraine. So Belarus is effect at present militarily minuscule, diplomatically important.
And I mean, how is all this this war in Ukraine? Because I expect the Belarus opposition are watching it fairly closely, particularly this incursion into Russia. I mean, how is all this impacting the struggle for regime change in Belarus?
Yeah, the problem when dealing with countries like Belarus is that the terms regime change and the implication there's a vast body of democratically minded people who want to see a change in the regime, I'm afraid it really doesn't exist. There are indeed people who are opponents to the dictatorial rule in Belarus. They tend, if you notice, to come from the west of the country, which used to be Polish territory. And therefore, the rest of the country is not showing any signs at all of wanting to change its rule. Many people in areas like in the world have or prefer a structure which is more authoritarian. And the notion of Belarus becoming a democracy tomorrow, or the opposition being strengthened by this war, I don't think we should count too much for that. Certainly, were Russia to lose the war in some respect, then certainly something might happen in Belarus. But Putin's still in power. The incursion is minuscule. There should be no real effect helping much the opposition in Belarus that you suggest.
Dr. Laskiewicz, thank you ever so much. Dr. Marek Laskiewicz is a RISE European Affairs analyst who was talking to me there on the line from London.